The day began like any other, but by the time it ended, my life had shifted in ways I could never have imagined. I found myself standing in the dimly lit hallway of my apartment, the intercom buzzing insistently, signaling an unexpected visitor. My mother wasn't home, and I hesitated before pressing the intercom button. On the other side was a man in uniform, his face stern, yet carrying a weight of awkwardness I couldn't immediately identify. A police officer. My heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of mistake? Had I unknowingly broken a law? The officer's voice was formal, professional, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "I need to speak with your father about a purse-snatching incident," he said. I froze. My father had been at home, quietly tending to his daily routines, unaware that suddenly, suspicion had fallen upon him. My mind raced. My father, the man who had always been a pillar of integrity, was now, inexplicably, under scrutiny. A wave of disbelief washed over me. I guided the officer into our home, the wooden floors creaking beneath our feet as we approached the familiar room that had always been a sanctuary for our family. In the corner sat the photograph of my late grandfather, a quiet reminder of the family legacy that had shaped our lives. The room also bore a Buddhist altar, a small space my father often visited in silent reflection. I led the officer to my father's usual chair. That's when I had to tell him the truth: he had long since departed this world. My father had passed away a month ago in a tragic traffic accident. The words seemed hollow even as I spoke them, but the officer's expression softened with empathy. Yet, despite the condolences, the officer's presence and questions left a lingering shadow over our home. Who would accuse a man no longer alive? Why had this false allegation been directed at my father? I felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and confusion. The air seemed heavier that day, thick with tension and disbelief. To understand how I arrived at this chaotic moment, I need to share a bit about myself. My name is David, a fourth-year university student with aspirations to work for a prestigious corporation. Yet, within me, a dilemma lingered, unresolved and gnawing. Should I inherit my father's factory or pursue a conventional corporate career? My father, the president of a small yet meaningful factory, had inspired both admiration and teenage embarrassment in me. As a child, I had dreamed of following in his footsteps. I imagined wearing the same responsibility, taking the helm of the factory, and continuing the legacy initiated by my grandfather. But during my rebellious teenage years, I felt a tinge of shame whenever I saw my father in his oil-stained work clothes, tirelessly managing operations and laborious, while the polished image of a suited businessman seemed to carry an irresistible prestige. That embarrassment remained latent, coloring my teenage perspective and lingering even now. However, maturity has a way of reshaping perception. Part-time jobs, late nights, and small struggles taught me to appreciate effort and dedication. I began to see my father differently, not as the awkward man with oil-stained hands, but as a tireless leader who supported not only our family but countless employees and their families. Yet, there was a subtle conflict in my mind. The allure of white-collar success still tugged at me, whispering that my father's hard-earned toil lacked glamour, no matter how noble it was. The tension between admiration and envy became starkly clear during a fateful shopping trip. We were hailed from behind, turning to discover Richard, a high school peer of my father's, standing there in a crisp suit. Richard represented a prestigious company, a visible embodiment of the success I had long considered alluring. Our casual conversation turned sharp when Richard asked if my father had indeed taken control of the family business. When my father confirmed, Richard's reaction was scathing. He ridiculed my father's factory, calling it dirty and expressing disbelief that someone without a university degree could rise to the position of president. I was taken aback not only by the audacity but by the subtle cruelty of it. The factory my grandfather had founded, now led by my father as the second-generation custodian of the family legacy, was being insulted in the most dismissive terms. My youthful embarrassment collided with a new awareness of injustice. Richard's smirk didn't end there. He pressed further. "Did you expand the factory? You said you would make it bigger in high school." My father's calm honesty pierced the tension. I lacked the business know-how. The dream didn't materialize, but at least we avoided bankruptcy. Richard laughed, clapping him on the shoulder, oblivious to the subtle lessons of dedication and perseverance that my father embodied. I felt a surge of indignation, a budding realization of how the world often misjudges the truly hardworking. This incident planted a seed, forcing me to confront a dilemma that had always lingered in the background. Was I to continue my father's legacy, with all its toil and uncertainty, or chase a path that promised prestige and social validation? The conflict gnawed at me quietly, unresolved, until fate intervened again, bringing Richard and the harsh reality of his jealousy back into my life. One seemingly ordinary day, that intercom buzzed again, and the cycle of disbelief, confusion, and moral reckoning began. My father's death, once a private grief, became intertwined with accusation and deceit. A false allegation, a man drunk with envy, and a factory filled with employees who respected and admired my father created a storm I could neither ignore nor diffuse. And thus, my journey to protect my father's honor, confront lies, and ultimately discover my own destiny began. It all started with the knock at the door, a knock that would change everything. A few weeks after the unsettling visit from the police officer, life continued its quiet rhythm, though a restless tension lingered in my mind. My father's unexpected death still weighed heavily, but another pressing question loomed: should I take over the family factory, or pursue the allure of a prestigious corporate career? The interwoven threads of admiration, embarrassment, and ambition tangled inside me, growing tighter with each passing day. It was during my part-time job at a local bar that fate chose to intervene. The Alumni Association of my father's high school decided to host an event there. A bar, bustling with casual patrons and the clinking of glasses, became the setting for a reunion that would unknowingly shape the trajectory of my life. Amid the chaos of orders, I found myself serving tables as usual. But then, there it was, a table filled with familiar faces from my father's past, his peers, and a figure I had hoped never to see again, Richard. As I approached their table, a mix of curiosity and anxiety coursed through me. My father, always warm and gracious even in death's shadow, had introduced me as his son. I nodded politely, attempting a composed demeanor despite my unease. The teasing from his old classmates came swiftly, punctuated with laughter and playful jabs. My father's friends were inebriated yet sincere in their camaraderie, and the atmosphere carried a strange mix of joy and awkwardness. Richard, seated nearby, wasted no time. His gaze settled on me, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We met recently, too, David, right?" he slurred, the alcohol in his breath heavy enough to make my stomach turn. "Are you planning to take over your father's small factory?" The question, seemingly casual, struck me like a thunderclap. It was more than a question, it was a test, a subtle judgment wrapped in a veneer of camaraderie. I admitted, truthfully, that I had not yet decided. My hesitation, the uncertainty in my voice, seemed to feed Richard's bravado. "Stop it," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger. "Your father's company is nothing special. David should work for a company like mine instead of inheriting such a lackluster business." Each word landed with force, a mixture of insult and jealousy, his anger sharpened by alcohol. Richard began recounting his career, a narrative that, at first glance, seemed impressive. From a mere assistant, he claimed, he had risen to head of accounting. But even in the blur of his drunken boasting, inconsistencies emerged. I sensed the gaps in his story, but wisely chose to remain silent. Challenging him in front of his peers could only create unnecessary complications, and I needed clarity more than confrontation. My father, despite his own grief and the lingering shadow of alcohol in the room, maintained composure. Instead of responding with anger, he engaged Richard with calm questions. "How has your department changed since we last met?" he asked, subtly probing. Richard, caught off guard, faltered. Eventually, he admitted to a sudden departmental transfer, trying to justify his story, but my father's careful observations exposed the truth. The company Richard spoke of had been absorbed by a foreign corporation, its accounting department relocated overseas. Laughter erupted among the alumni. Richard, now red-faced and stammering, attempted to recover his composure but ultimately decided to leave, walking out with heavy, defeated steps. Witnessing this, I felt an unexpected surge of pride. My father, even in the haze of grief and occasional drink, had navigated the confrontation with dignity and sharp insight. He had revealed the truth without resorting to anger, proving his integrity in the eyes of everyone present. That evening marked a turning point for me. I had long viewed my father through the lens of my teenage embarrassment, the oil-stained work clothes, the modest factory, the absence of flashy corporate prestige. But witnessing him defend his honor with grace, even in front of someone as brazenly jealous as Richard, reshaped my perspective entirely. My father's legacy wasn't in suits or titles, it was in unwavering honesty, dedication, and the respect he commanded from those who truly knew him. The encounter also clarified Richard's character. His envy had been a constant companion, rooted in school days and a romantic rivalry that lingered into adulthood. The girl he had once desired had chosen my father, planting seeds of resentment that festered over decades. His attempts to undermine my father were less about facts and more about settling old scores. Understanding this gave me a new lens. Jealousy can corrupt, and perception often blinds one to reality. Returning to the bar after the reunion, I replayed every moment in my mind. The contrast between Richard's arrogance and my father's quiet strength was stark. It made me reflect deeply on the choice I faced, to chase societal notions of success or to uphold a legacy built on resilience, loyalty, and moral integrity. The decision was no longer just about financial security, it had become a question of character, of values I wanted to embody as a man. But the reunion also reminded me of the human fragility of jealousy and ambition. Richard, despite his boasts, had built a house of cards. One moment, he appeared triumphant and successful, the next, exposed and embarrassed, he walked away defeated. Life had a way of revealing truth, and it often did so harshly. My father, despite his modesty, had cultivated respect and loyalty that even Richard could not tarnish. As the night drew to a close, I realized that this reunion was more than a gathering of old classmates. It was a pivotal lesson in life, ambition, and the true measure of a person. I had seen firsthand that integrity, diligence, and compassion mattered more than wealth, titles, or outward appearances. I had witnessed my father's quiet power, the legacy he had nurtured not for glory, but for the well-being of those around him. Returning home, the contrast between my earlier teenage embarrassment and my newfound respect for my father was staggering. The very factory I had once looked down upon was now a symbol of resilience, community, and generational pride. Richard's attempts to belittle it had failed spectacularly, and in his failure, I saw the consequences of envy and deceit. Yet, the questions lingered. Could I truly take on this responsibility? Could I honor my father's legacy while steering the company toward growth? The reunion had provided clarity on character, but the path forward remained uncertain. That night, as I stared at my father's photograph, the gravity of the decision settled heavily upon me. I wasn't just choosing a career, I was choosing the kind of man I wanted to become, the values I wanted to uphold, and the legacy I intended to carry forward. In that quiet, reflective moment, I made an unspoken vow. I would not allow jealousy, envy, or societal expectations to dictate my path. I would carefully weigh my choices, learn from the lessons Richard's rivalry had highlighted, and honor the man whose quiet dignity had outshone the loud arrogance of those around him. Little did I know, the challenges were far from over. Richard's shadow, fueled by decades of resentment, would soon return, bringing with him accusations and deceit that threatened to upend everything my father had built. But that night, following the reunion, I felt a flicker of resolve, a quiet determination that no lie, no jealousy, and no accusation could extinguish. The stage was set. The factory, my father's legacy, and the looming choices before me formed a battleground not of wealth or power, but of truth, honor, and integrity. The lessons of that night would guide me in the months to come as I faced challenges that tested my courage, my loyalty, and ultimately, my understanding of what it meant to be a son and a leader. The weeks following the alumni reunion should have been peaceful, yet life had other plans. My father's absence left a tangible void in the factory, a space that had once pulsed with his quiet authority and steady guidance. My mother tried her best to fill the gap, but age and experience limited her capacity. The factory's machinery hummed steadily, the rhythm of production continuing almost mechanically, yet beneath it, tension simmered. Little did I know that this tension was about to erupt, brought forth by a man whose bitterness had never truly faded, Richard. Richard appeared one morning like a storm, striding through the factory doors with an air of entitlement. His voice boomed over the rhythmic hum of machinery, immediately drawing the attention of every employee. "I demand justice," he shouted. "Your father has wronged me." His words carried a weight that seemed absurd in the context of the quiet, methodical space. I froze for a moment, trying to grasp the situation. What could he possibly mean? My father had been gone for a month, and here he was, accusing a man who could no longer defend himself. It didn't take long for me to understand the nature of his intrusion. Richard had returned to the factory with a singular goal: to tarnish my father's name with a fabricated accusation. He claimed that my father had been involved in a purse-snatching incident. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. I could feel my chest tighten, a mixture of anger and grief surging through me. How could someone carry such malice, using lies to attack a man who had dedicated his life to integrity and hard work? I stepped forward, my voice firm, attempting to assert control over the growing chaos. "Richard, this is absurd. My father is innocent. He is no longer here, yet you bring these baseless claims into our factory." My words were met with a mixture of murmurs and whispers among the employees. The hum of machinery softened as workers paused to witness the confrontation. Richard's eyes glinted with defiance, and he raised his voice, repeating the accusation with fervor, convinced of his own narrative. The confrontation escalated quickly. Richard, fueled by years of envy and humiliation, recounted a timeline for the alleged purse-snatching incident, claiming it had occurred 2 weeks prior. His details were specific, yet impossible, given my father's death a month earlier. I challenged him repeatedly, asking for proof, questioning his timeline, and highlighting the impossibility of his claims. But his arrogance and intoxicated certainty created a barrier that facts alone could not pierce. As I engaged Richard, I observed the reactions of the factory workers. Their expressions shifted from confusion to indignation. Many of them had known my father for decades, witnessing firsthand the dedication, fairness, and honesty he had instilled in the workplace. Some spoke up, defending his character. "Your president wouldn't do something like that," one employee shouted. "He always considers the well-being of staff and partners before profit." Others nodded in agreement, their voices joining in a rising chorus of loyalty and support. Despite this collective defense, Richard remained unyielding. He attempted to discredit the employees, belittling their knowledge and dismissing their words. "They're biased. You don't know the truth," he barked. Yet, with each assertion, the inconsistencies in his story became more glaring. I could see his composure beginning to crack, the veneer of superiority peeling away under the combined weight of fact, loyalty, and reason. The emotional intensity in the factory escalated further when Richard launched personal attacks, mocking my father's profession and the employees who had dedicated their lives to the company. It was as if he wanted to break not just the memory of my father, but the very community that had thrived under his leadership. My heart pounded with a mix of fury and sorrow. How dare he attempt to erase decades of hard work and moral integrity with lies born from jealousy? I refused to back down. "Richard, your accusations are baseless. My father is no longer here to defend himself, but I will not allow you to sully his name." My words rang out over the factory floor, gaining strength with every repetition. The employees, emboldened by my stand, began to speak more openly, sharing stories of my father's kindness, fairness, and tireless dedication. The collective memory of his character weighed heavily against Richard's lies, highlighting the stark contrast between envy-fueled malice and genuine integrity. Amid the confrontation, I pressed Richard further, asking how he could justify his claims given my father's death. His response was erratic, a mix of deflection, denial, and attempts to shift blame. Yet, each inconsistency was a thread I could tug at, unraveling the tangled web of his lies. It became clear that his jealousy, nurtured since school days, had festered into a dangerous obsession, manifesting in a scheme to attack my father's reputation posthumously. The climax of the confrontation came when I revealed evidence that could not be ignored. A staff member, having recorded the conversation during the heated exchange, provided proof of Richard's lies and aggressive accusations. His words, once delivered with bluster, now hung exposed in the air, undeniable and clear. The factory fell into a stunned silence as Richard's bravado collapsed. His eyes widened, and for the first time, he seemed vulnerable, confronted not by threats or anger, but by the irrefutable weight of truth. Richard's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and desperation. He attempted to regain control, raising his voice and insisting that the evidence was fabricated, yet the employees' unwavering support for my father left him without recourse. The power of collective loyalty, respect, and truth became palpable. It was a moment of revelation for everyone present. Integrity, once established, cannot be dismantled by envy or falsehoods. Finally, realizing that his attempts had failed and that the factory community would not be swayed, Richard fled the premises. His departure was marked by heavy, humiliating footsteps, a physical manifestation of his defeated ego. In that moment, the weight of responsibility I felt shifted subtly. This was no longer just about defending my father's honor, it was about safeguarding the legacy he had built, preserving the respect and trust he had cultivated over decades. The confrontation left me both exhausted and determined. Exhausted from the emotional and moral battle, yet determined to take the next steps in protecting the integrity of our family and the factory. I knew that reporting Richard to the authorities was not just necessary, it was a moral imperative. The lies he had propagated, born from decades of envy and bitterness, needed formal consequences. Justice was not just about punishment, it was about ensuring that the truth prevailed and that my father's legacy remained untarnished. That day, standing amid the hum of machinery and the watchful eyes of employees who had silently supported me throughout, I felt the weight of my role as both son and potential leader. The factory was no longer just a workplace, it was a living testament to my father's values, and I was now entrusted with its future. The confrontation had tested me, revealing my capacity to stand firm in the face of injustice and to rally a community around truth. As I walked through the factory later that evening, reflecting on the events, a sense of clarity began to emerge. Richard's lies, while temporarily threatening, had ultimately revealed the strength of the bonds my father had forged. His dedication, his fairness, and his tireless work ethic had created a legacy that could not be easily shaken. And within me, a seed of resolve began to grow, a commitment to honor that legacy, to ensure that the principles my father lived by would continue to guide the company, and to prepare myself for the day when I would fully assume the responsibilities he had carried so diligently. The factory, once a place of uncertainty for me, now became a symbol of potential, resilience, and moral fortitude. The events of that day had crystallized my understanding of what it meant to inherit not just a business, but a set of values, a commitment to a community, and a responsibility that extended far beyond myself. The confrontation with Richard had been a crucible, and emerging from it, I realized that I was no longer merely a passive observer of my father's legacy, I was now an active participant, entrusted with its protection and continuation. The dust of confrontation had barely settled in the factory when the weight of responsibility pressed down on me. Richard's lies had been exposed in front of the employees, humiliating him, yet the threat of lingering repercussions still hung in the air. False accusations, especially those aimed at someone no longer alive, have a way of casting long shadows. I knew that leaving the matter unresolved could stain my father's reputation, taint the legacy he had spent decades building, and undermine the respect of the very employees who had defended him so fervently. Acting decisively, I approached the local police with the evidence we had gathered. A thoughtful staff member had recorded Richard's tirade and admissions during the factory confrontation, capturing his lies and aggressive behavior in clear detail. The recording, paired with witness statements from employees who had stood by my father's honor, provided irrefutable proof that the accusations were fabricated. Presenting this evidence, I felt a sense of calm determination. Finally, the scales of justice could begin to balance. The police moved quickly. Within days, Richard was summoned, confronted with the weight of his falsehoods, and officially charged with attempting to defame a deceased person. The humiliation he had faced in the factory continued to shadow him into the legal proceedings. Each lie he tried to assert was met with documentation and testimony, leaving him no avenue to defend himself. I observed the legal process with a mixture of relief and reflection. It was a stark reminder that integrity and truth, though tested, ultimately prevail when bolstered by courage and evidence. During this time, life inside the factory had returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet the absence of my father was deeply felt. I stepped into the spaces he had once occupied, guiding operations, making decisions, and slowly gaining the respect of employees who had watched me grow from a hesitant son into a determined young man. Their loyalty, so evident during the confrontation with Richard, became my anchor. I realized that leadership was not merely about titles or authority, it was about earning trust, demonstrating consistency, and honoring the principles instilled by those who had come before. Richard's legal downfall progressed swiftly. Confronted with incontrovertible evidence, his attempts to feign innocence crumbled. The courtroom became a stage for his humiliation, with every claim contradicted by recordings and witness statements. He was ultimately convicted for spreading false accusations, defaming my father posthumously, and attempting to undermine a business built on decades of hard work and integrity. The relief I felt was profound. Justice had been served, and my father's name had been cleared. The satisfaction was not vengeful but restorative, a reaffirmation that truth could withstand envy and malice. The aftermath of Richard's downfall brought unexpected revelations. A few days later, his wife arrived at our home, bearing a gift box and apologies. She expressed deep regret for her husband's actions, explaining that they had been driven by wounds he had carried from the past. She revealed that she, too, had recognized the futility and cruelty of his vendetta, and had decided to seek a divorce. The encounter underscored the personal consequences of envy and deceit. Richard had lost more than his public credibility, he had fractured his personal life and severed the bonds that might have offered support in times of struggle. Amid this turbulence, I found myself confronting my own internal crossroads. Graduation loomed on the horizon, and with it, a pivotal decision: to pursue the corporate career I had once longed for, or to embrace the responsibility of leading the family factory. The confrontation with Richard, the loyalty of the employees, and the enduring legacy of my father's character had reshaped my perspective. What had once seemed a choice between prestige and humility now appeared as a question of purpose, values, and identity. I decided to step into leadership, motivated by a blend of duty, respect, and ambition. Taking over the factory was not a simple inheritance, it was a commitment to continue my father's work, uphold the values he had embodied, and honor the trust placed in him by the employees and the community. Each decision I made, each conversation with staff, became a reflection of the lessons learned from both my father and the confrontation with Richard. Leadership was no longer an abstract goal, it was a living, evolving responsibility. Stepping into this role, I was determined to build on my father's legacy while addressing the areas where he had struggled. With a degree in business administration freshly in hand, I recognized my ability to manage the operational and financial facets of the company. Yet I also acknowledged the need to learn from the dedicated employees who had been the backbone of the factory, those who possessed deep technical knowledge and had worked alongside my father for years. Their insights were invaluable, and their loyalty a testament to the culture my father had fostered. Over time, the bond between myself and the staff strengthened. Their stories, anecdotes, and shared memories painted a vivid picture of my father's greatness, reinforcing the qualities I had begun to admire. I realized how much I had misunderstood in my younger years. The embarrassment I had once felt at his oil-stained clothes and modest demeanor now transformed into profound respect and inspiration. Each tale of his diligence, fairness, and care for employees became a guiding principle for my own leadership style. I spent countless hours studying the operations, learning the intricacies of production, understanding the challenges my father had faced, and identifying opportunities for growth. The factory, once merely a symbol of family heritage, now became a canvas for innovation and improvement. Every decision was informed by a commitment to honor my father's vision while adapting to the demands of the modern world. I sought to become a president who was not only respected but loved, a leader who valued integrity, loyalty, and community as much as profitability. One quiet evening, after a long day of balancing meetings, employee consultations, and operational decisions, I found myself standing before my father's portrait. The oil stains on my hands from assisting on the factory floor reminded me of the man who had come before me, the legacy he had left, and the path I was now forging. I spoke softly, acknowledging my earlier misconceptions and expressing a resolve to carry forward his work with pride and dedication. The connection felt almost spiritual, as if my father's presence was guiding my hand, reassuring me that I was on the right path. That night, I reflected deeply on the lessons learned, the destructive power of envy as embodied by Richard, the resilience and dignity of my father, and the profound importance of community and loyalty. I recognized that leadership was more than strategy, it was about character, empathy, and the courage to confront falsehoods and uphold truth. The factory, my father's life's work, was now entrusted to me, and I felt a profound sense of purpose. The months following Richard's legal downfall were transformative, both for the factory and for me. The heavy cloud of false accusations had lifted, leaving behind a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. No longer weighed down by uncertainty or external threats, I began to embrace my responsibilities as the leader of my father's factory. Each morning, I walked through the doors with a sense of reverence, aware that I was not just managing a business, but continuing a legacy painstakingly built over generations. Taking over was not a ceremonial gesture, it was a commitment to breathe life into the vision my father had left behind. I spent hours with the employees, listening, learning, and observing. Their insights into the intricacies of production, technological processes, and customer relations became invaluable. I realized that leadership was not about asserting authority, it was about collaboration, mutual respect, and a willingness to absorb knowledge from those who had devoted years of their lives to this company. The employees' loyalty, tested during Richard's confrontation, now became a source of strength and inspiration. The factory itself began to transform under our combined efforts. Small improvements, once overlooked in the rush of daily operations, were implemented with care. Machinery was upgraded, workflow streamlined, and employee training enhanced. I balanced innovation with tradition, ensuring that while the factory adapted to modern standards, it retained the ethical and human-centered foundation my father had instilled. Each success, no matter how minor, felt like a tribute to him, a step closer to realizing the dreams he had once harbored but had been unable to fully achieve. Yet, the most profound transformation was within myself. I reflected frequently on the young man who had once been embarrassed by his father's oil-stained clothes, the factory, and his modest life. Those feelings had long been replaced by deep admiration and respect. The realization dawned that true greatness is not always flashy, it is often quiet, steadfast, and rooted in service to others. My father's life exemplified this, and I now strive to emulate it not merely in managing the factory, but in living with integrity, humility, and dedication. The community around the factory also began to notice the changes. Local partners, employees, and even former competitors commented on the renewed vigor and efficiency of operations. While financial metrics improved, it was the human impact, the morale of employees, the respect within the industry, and the pride that radiated from the workforce that mattered most to me. I had inherited not just a company, but a community of people who had placed their trust in my father, and now, in me. The responsibility was immense, but so was the fulfillment. I continued to honor my father in personal ways, speaking to his portrait during quiet moments after work, sharing updates on progress, and reflecting on decisions. The oil stains that once embarrassed me became symbols of connection, tangible reminders of the diligence and sweat my father had poured into every aspect of the factory. They were no longer marks of embarrassment, but badges of respect, a physical testament to the work ethic I now sought to embody. The lessons from Richard's envious assault on my father's reputation remained etched in my mind. Jealousy, deceit, and malice could disrupt lives, but they could not overcome truth, loyalty, and integrity. I took these lessons to heart, shaping my approach to leadership, conflict resolution, and long-term strategy. Each challenge was now an opportunity to demonstrate moral courage and to reinforce the values that had guided my father throughout his life. Gradually, my vision expanded beyond preservation, it evolved into growth. I set plans in motion to expand the factory, fulfill my father's long-held dream of making it bigger, and ensure it could continue to support the employees, their families, and the community. Strategic investments in technology, training, and infrastructure laid the groundwork for sustainable development. Yet, the expansion was never about personal glory, it was about honoring a legacy, fulfilling promises, and uplifting the people who had always believed in my father's vision. The transformation was not instantaneous. Challenges arose, market fluctuations, operational setbacks, and internal resistance, but I approached each obstacle with patience and resolve. I drew strength from my father's example, the unwavering support of the staff, and the knowledge that every decision mattered not just to me, but to the generations before and after me. The factory had become more than a workplace. It was a living chronicle of family dedication, community trust, and human resilience. As I navigated these challenges, moments of reflection became vital. Late at night, in the quiet of the factory office, I would pause to observe the hum of machinery and the focused faces of employees. I realized that leadership was a blend of strategy, empathy, and perseverance. It required understanding people, valuing their contributions, and guiding them with integrity, qualities my father had embodied, and qualities I now sought to cultivate in myself. Time passed, and the fruits of our labor began to manifest. The factory grew steadily, expanding its reach, improving its output, and gaining recognition in the industry. More importantly, the culture my father had nurtured, respect, collaboration, and fairness, remained intact. I had become not just a successor in title, but a leader in spirit, dedicated to upholding the principles that had earned my father admiration, loyalty, and love. Looking back, I understood that the journey from doubt and embarrassment to leadership and pride had been shaped by trials, confrontations, and revelations. Richard's envy and false accusations had been a crucible, forcing me to confront the essence of integrity, loyalty, and courage. The lessons from that painful episode, combined with the wisdom inherited from my father, had forged the foundation of the person I had become. Standing before my father's portrait one final time, I felt a profound sense of connection. I spoke not only of business goals and operational improvements but also of moral responsibility, respect for employees, and the continuation of a legacy rooted in integrity. In that silent, reflective moment, it felt as if my father's presence affirmed the path I had chosen, the path of honor, perseverance, and purposeful leadership. The factory, once a symbol of my teenage embarrassment, now stood as a monument to resilience, family, and community. The legacy of my grandfather, nurtured by my father, and now carried forward by me, had endured through adversity, envy, and personal loss. I had become a president worthy of that legacy, equipped not only with business acumen but with the moral compass and dedication necessary to honor the generations before me. With each decision, each step toward expansion, and each interaction with employees, I realized that the true measure of success was not in wealth or recognition, but in the enduring respect, loyalty, and trust of those around me. I had transformed the factory into a space where my father's values lived on, where employees felt valued, and where community and legacy thrived. And so, the story that began with doubt, embarrassment, and loss culminated in purpose, pride, and leadership. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had revealed the power of integrity, perseverance, and the enduring impact of a life well lived. I had inherited more than a factory, I had inherited a legacy, and with it, the responsibility and privilege of carrying my father's vision into the future. From that moment forward, I dedicated myself fully, working tirelessly to honor my father's dream of expanding the town factory, a legacy preserved through generations, now entrusted to my hands. And in every oil-stained uniform, in every hum of machinery, and in every loyal employee, I saw the reflection of my father's greatness, guiding me as I built a future worthy of the past.